process of building a monument. Initially, each project begins with a conception of an idea, which then yields a design, which at that point, fabrication begins. After all this, the final phase is the permanent placement. For the sake of discussion, I'll use my recent installation of the Bracero Monument in downtown LA as an example of all the steps it takes to create public art. When I first heard of the RFQ regarding the Bracero Monument, I was eager to apply. It began what would be a very emotional journey wherein I found a new appreciation for what the Braceros sacrificed throughout their life. After hours of reading and countless videos, I realized that this project was bigger than me. I interviewed more than 2 or 3 dozen Braceros, some of which were at the age of 99, others in their 70s and 80s. It was a very moving and humbling experience. There were key elements that stuck with me, one being their garb, the loss of family, the short tools that broke backs, the exposure to DDTs, the railroads, the cotton fields, the barbed wire lifestyle, and those that were lost. As you can see here, some of the focal points in my interviews and research were then used in the overall design. Their narrative was primary, composition was important, and above all, in my mind, the scale itself would make a statement. The next phase is the design phase. After the concept has been approved by the committee, I then take it to the studio and start to sculpt it in 3D. This is a combination of 3D output for enlargement purposes. I then coat the design in clay and then resculpt all the nuances, things like hands, gestures, drapery. All these things need to be sculpted. Also taken into consideration, the overall placement of the design is also factored in this phase. Fabrication. At this point, the mold is begun. The mold is a silicone rubber that is poured on the original. Once the silicone is dry, it is taken to a foundry where wax is then brushed in. Over a period of a few days, you end up with a perfect duplicate of the original sculpture. Next is the dip process that can take up to 2-3 weeks. Once that shell is completed, it is then put in an oven. The wax is burned out. The mold and the bronze is heated to about 17 to 1900 degrees. Once it's poured, it takes about 30 minutes for that bronze to solidify and cool off. The shell is then broken off and you end up with components in bronze. An average design of this scale could be between 70 to 90 components that have to be welded back together, and whenever there's a welding seam, that has to be resculpted in metal by the artist. Once that's done, a patina is applied, and then it waits in state for the installation date. The placement of public art is just as important as the art itself. Whenever I encounter a new project, I visit the site and I take in the surrounding landscape. Buildings, trees, horizons, all these factor in my design. With simulation software, I can create a 3D model and I can factor in sunlight as the seasons change, the proportions of the design within the existing elements, and factor in the line of sight. All of these factors together allow for a more immersive and cohesive experience. Before breaking ground, I meet with the local entities such as street services, lighting, safety, and we work within the city limitations and guidelines. safety on site is definitely a priority. The way of achieving a perfect fit is to have jigs on site and at the foundry. These are used to ensure that the bronze assembles to the concrete structure. It's imperative that any internal framing in the bronze meets up perfectly with the site development. Prior to the installation date, I create a mock-up in the 3D software so that we can measure and strategize with traffic and safety, and once that's done, we set the date. That day, the bronze is transported to the site. A crane is then used to lift the bronze onto the pedestal. After inspection, the bronzes are tightened down and welded to the pedestal permanently. After everything's said and done, we then wait for the unveiling date, and more often than not, the crowds are fairly large. In this particular case, we have between 5,000 to 7,000 spectators. As you can see, this is a very complicated process. There are a lot of moving parts. The process itself is listed on the left, and up at the top there's a timeline. All this is based on a target date. As you can see, this type of Gantt can be updated on a daily basis. I'm able to see what phases can work in parallel and which lead to the beginning of the next phase. This is the best way logistically that I find in my mind to control such a project. A big part of something of this scale as well is management of funds, and this is all based on budget. As you can see here, everything is recorded, checks that were made, when they were made, and in the end, some projects are profitable, others aren't as profitable, but here you can see budget against cost, which then yields profit. There's also a contingency in every project for any surprises. I've been involved in public art most of my adult life. With over 20 years experience and over 36 installations, I've come across all walks of life. I've sat and discussed designs with politicians, CEOs, clergymen, and those that work the fields of this great nation. It's through public art that we can promote pride, tradition, preserve history, express a narrative, and promote dialogue. Each project helps me evolve as an artist. Engagement is a big part of public art, whether it be committees or stakeholders or the surrounding community. I've always made it a point to perform some sort of public outreach. It's important to involve the community, not just the immediate stakeholders, but the surrounding stakeholders as well. Being able to share public art in an open forum, it's my goal to have my designs inspire young minds throughout the years. It's also important to have immediate engagement from stakeholders. As a tool, I use the previously mentioned Gantt as a real-time update. Anyone involved can access the spreadsheet and be updated immediately with where we are, what's been done, and add any comment or critique that they see fit. Monumental designs always come with challenges of their own. In this design here in 2012, the architects thought it'd be best if I lowered one of the front legs. Instead of doing that, I redesigned the rear configuration and the internal support so that the rear of the design would carry the brunt of the weight, would be more rigid to withstand any seismic activity or wind shear or long-term metal fatigue, in the hope of retaining the graceful design or the delicate aesthetics of having the horse up on two legs. And in the end, we all agreed that the effort was worth it. This particular challenge took place on the day of the installation. The design on the flatbed truck measured in at about 17 feet, and this bridge coming up measured in at 17 feet. So we aired down the tires, drove a bit faster, and luckily we made it through without a hitch. It can't be done. Sometimes my designs are a bit crazy. When I showed this to the engineers, they thought I was out of my mind. They couldn't approve it based on what I had shown them, and they were worried about suspending a 500-pound bronze 18 feet in the air. So then I went back to my studio. I found a simulation software that I had to learn. Once I was able to use the software, I created a rough design that I thought would hold the weight and pass the engineer's criteria. I then built a rough design in my garage, took measurements. I then had it made in structural steel, submitted it to the engineers. After they completed their calculations, they approved the design. The final design, in my mind, is exactly what I envisioned. I wanted to create the illusion of levitation, and in the end, the design is perfect. I usually finish on time and on budget. Even if I sacrifice a profit for aesthetics, more often than not, I've never gone back to the committee and asked for a bigger budget. This is the exception. In this case here, this is a huge installation, probably about half a football field. And my intent was to not just create an installation where people come and admire art. I really wanted it to be a journey, in this case, a religious journey that would be a focal point of the parish. I met with the committee, I shared my new design, and they were more than willing to raise more money. Monuments are built from the ground up, from the foundation to the internal structure, which is assembled to the bronze with what's called floating connections to ensure little to no electrolysis. The bronze itself is patinaed. Patina is a way of inducing a chemical reaction with the use of heat and chemicals to change the surface of the bronze. Different colors are achieved with this method. The beauty of it is that you are not painting the bronze in any way. This ensures that the finish can last for years, even centuries. The elements do have an effect on the patina. Patinas usually evolve with time. There is a 2 to 3 year maintenance on all bronzes. Here are examples of designs that have been in place for about 10 to 15 years.